Approaching, getting closer. That is what the Fed signaled about an interest rate hike this year, if the right conditions are met. Now, consumer prices rose 0.1% in July. Inflation has not moved much nearer to the Fed's 2% target. That's a key factor in their decision about raising interest rates. And minutes from the Fed's July meeting showed policymakers are still concerned about tepid wages. However, they said job numbers are moving towards a level they consider to be full employment. And the economic slowdown in China was also a factor in the Fed's considerations. However, the American housing market is powering ahead. New housing climbed at its highest rate in nearly 8 years. Home starts increased 0.2% at an annual rate of 1.2 million, the highest level since October 2007. And for more on the U.S. housing market and the economy, I'm joined by Amir Korangy. He is the publisher of Property and Business magazine, The Real Deal. Amir, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on again, Michelle.
Amir, the housing market seems to be on fire. We have the pace of new home construction hitting a 7-year high, a gauge of home builder sentiment rising to its highest level since 2005, and existing home sales hitting their highest point since the recession. Amir, what do you attribute the strength in the housing market to?
Well, I think it has to do with a lot of pent-up demand and tight lending regulations, which have loosened up now. And you're seeing that in the housing starts, and you're seeing that in the purchases.
Amir, how much of this linked to people wanting to get mortgages with lower interest rates before the Fed raises rates?
I don't think the Fed raising the rates is that big of a deal. I think that has already happened. The rates are fairly low. If the Fed raises the rates, it'll be 1/8 of a point, 1/4 of a point. That won't have a huge impact on it. I think the rates are as low as they're going to be, and they're in a good place right now. So that wasn't really the case. The case was loosening lending regulations, and that's happened.
Why are banks relaxing? Why are banks lending more then?
Because they feel like the economy is in a stable place, so they're not where they used to be, and they're lending at an easier pace than they used to be after
Amir,
the recession.
So the banks are lending, the housing market seems to be doing well. What does this signal about the health of the U.S. economy overall?
Well, the U.S. economy is in a good place right now. As long as the GDP growth can be at about 2%, the U.S. consumer is in the driver's seat.
Well, the U.S. economy may be looking like it's on solid footing, but based on the Fed's minutes today, it doesn't seem likely that we will see liftoff in September. Do you think the Fed will start raising rates in September, or is a delay more likely?
I think they're going to have to raise rates slightly, even if it's 1/8 of a point, just to show that they're disciplined to do so. But that remains to be seen. Nobody can predict the Fed, as that's been shown before.
Well, no, we can't predict. We can only analyze every word that comes out of Fed Chair Janet Yellen's mouth and give our own interpretations. But analysts are saying that China's devaluation of the renminbi may impact the Fed's decision, that it will cause concerns at raising rates, especially with a weaker yuan, and that now is not the time. What do you think of that?
Well, the dollar strength is making the Chinese lose their export position and their, as the export powerhouse, because the two currencies are linked. So the Chinese central bank is jumped ahead and devalued their currency so that they're better positioned when the rates are inevitably raised.
Well, the U.S. housing market has been boosted by Chinese investors, particularly in the top cities like New York and San Francisco, also in other cities across the country. You're very involved in China. Do you think that the lower yuan may impact the U.S. housing market in terms of Chinese buyers?
Well, the Chinese buyers have been the biggest foreign investors in the U.S. market in the last 2 years, and it's continuing to grow. The Chinese believe that they only have a small window for this, and that's why they're putting more and more money in every year. out of all the EB-5 visas that are issued in the United States, 85% go to Chinese citizens. And that's been the case for the last 4 years. More than 85% of the US EB-5 visas go to Chinese citizens because they really want to come, bring the money here. And the number one reason for investing here is not really for return on investment, but rather for safety, for what the U.S. Represents as a democratic nation where they could park their money, and for education and immigration status for their kids and for themselves.
Well,
I don't think that's going to change too much.
Let's bring it back to the U.S. And Amir, the federal agency that regulates mortgage finance companies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, it has set new goals for low-income housing. Those mortgage companies must now meet certain targets to provide loans for lower income housing. And some say this is basically encouraging them to relax lending standards for subprime borrowers, and that we're getting back into the same patterns that led to the 2008 subprime housing crisis. What's your take on that?
To be honest, with Fannie and Freddie, by the time there's so much red tape in those organizations that by the time anything really happens that could impact the market, we could see ourselves in another cycle. So I wouldn't really hold my breath waiting for those guys to make anything that's going to really impact the market.
All right, they are relaxing those lending standards, and that could trigger another cycle. We'll see if you're right. Hopefully you are. Thank you so much, Amir Korangy, publisher of Property and Business magazine, The Real Deal.